Hi, I'm Fred Kasten. Welcome to the 2021 Danny Barker Banjo and Guitar Festival, a mix of music and talk honoring the life, legacy, and music of one of the great New Orleanians of the 20th century, Danny Barker. My guest this hour is composer, pianist, and educator Roger Dickerson. Mr. Dickerson, what a great pleasure to have you once again a part of the Danny Barker Festival.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. It's a great honor to be on the program and especially to be talking to you.
Well, and we both dearly miss, I know, one of our one of your frequent colleagues throughout most of your life, and one of our great additions to this conversation for a number of years, the wonderful Mr. Ellis Marcellus.
Right. We have had him with us as long as I can remember since I've been working with the Danny Barker Festival. Alice has been the other person on this interview with me, and unfortunately, we don't have him this time because he passed away in the March of this year.
But we're appreciative of the many opportunities we have had to have that discussion, and
Right.
we continue it and somewhat in remembrance of he as well as Mr. Danny Barker. What do you recall about your first awareness of Danny Barker, Roger, as whenever that occurred?
Well, I knew about Danny Barker actually through Alice Marcellus because he had met Danny Barker before I did it. Of course, we both had met Danny Barker's reputation, but he met the person first. And
Yeah.
he was constantly telling me about Danny Barker. And then finally, I met Danny Barker. But I think it was facilitated through Dr. Jack Burkles, the
Bourbon Street
a
Black.
professor from Temple University who was here, came down to do some research on traditional New Orleans music. And I got to know Dr. Burkle, and it was through Dr. Burkle that Danny Barker then and I began to develop more of a relationship, which we didn't have before. I just didn't know him. I knew where he was at the Jazz Museum and down in the French Quarter, and other stories that I heard from Alice Marcellus about him.
As a younger musician, then the awareness had not been there necessarily of him, or what did he have much of a local reputation as you were first coming up?
Well, many of the traditional musicians knew him, practically all of them, because he was playing in New Orleans before he left to go off to New York, where he lived for some 30 years, I understand. But he was a full-blown musician. He came out of a family of musicians, and of course, he learned the trade as many musicians do from family members and others. And so he was practicing, and I think I remember some of the stories or reasons he decided to move to New York, but he went to New York and had quite an experience, you know. But he was known here in New Orleans by maybe not the young like myself. I didn't know him, you see,
Right.
and and of course he came back. I guess actually he was away for so long for that 30 years.
35 years, yeah.
Right. I returned from my studies in Europe on a Fulbright to Vienna, and then I had previously been in the military in the USRA headquarters been in Heidelberg, Germany. So I was away for a while, and before that, I was in grad school away from New Orleans.
Outside of town, yeah.
So when I came back in '62, which is a year pretty much fixed in my mind, Danny Barker, I think, came back that same year, the next year. At least I didn't meet him until the next year.
Next year. Um, the One of the things that you mentioned of the family, and I think by one of his counts, there were 54 members of the Barber and Associate family who were musicians.
Right. Yes. Uh, well, and as Danny put it, in those days, if you wanted to, be somebody or do something outstanding, one of the things was to become a musician. Many of the people from the town, the part of New Orleans that he grew up in were plasterers, and they were bricklayers and carpenters, and did, those kinds of works, and plumbers and that sort of thing. And he decided he wanted to be a musician like some of the other members in the family who were drummers and who played instruments.
Yeah. He told you in a great interview you did with him, I believe at the Palm Court
Mhm.
Cafe, that he first started on clarinet. Then he bought a ukulele from an aunt who, there was a ukulele craze. She had one and kind of wearied of it, and it became his.
Right,
And he went on from there.
right. And he was around music as most youngsters growing up in New Orleans, seemingly all over. I lived near Treme and went to school in Treme, and he was born right in the middle of Treme, I think in the Seventh Ward. And so music was in the air. You breathed it every day. You saw, you heard it, and it was a natural thing to be able to do.
And he also tagged along with his four Barbarian uncles, Paul,
Right,
Louis, Lucian, and Willie,
right.
and
Mhm.
they sort of adopted him. He said he became known as another Barbarin.
Right. It was a large network of family, and of course, even if they're not your family members, musicians they're a large family, and we have a sense of that in New Orleans among the musicians. There's a camaraderie among all the musicians, whether you're genetically connected or not. you know.
Right. Well, he taught with the help of a youngster in his neighborhood. He said he learned the ukulele. He said this little kid who he said passed away. I don't know if that was during
Uh,
his teenage years or fairly early in life anyway, but he said it really taught him the fundamentals. And then he realized that banjo had the same essential, tunings and
mhm.
setup, and that got him to move up to that. I think his uncle Paul may have sent him his first real decent banjo.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and listen to that recording. It was a long recording. We only had part of it because I couldn't do the whole thing for the Palm Court. The whole recording I made it at Palm Court, but I remember playing it at the Palm Court, a section of it, because we did have the Danny Barker Forum there 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. His so he did head to New York in 1930 and became um, after an apprenticeship of some years in New Orleans. He had quite a career there in New York.
Yeah, and from what I understand, much of it had to do, of course, he developed into his own as a musician, but he met Jelly Roll there, and by all cousins or folks from New Orleans, and they introduced him to Jelly Roll, and of course Jelly Roll was from the Seventh Ward, from Frenchman Street, and and he took a liking to Danny, and Jelly Roll was an established figure at that time in New York, getting gigs, and so Danny found himself in a position of being able to hire people for Jelly Roll's gigs. And he had quite a lot of stature because of that in the beginning, simply because they had the New Orleans connection, you see.
Right. Yes.
And then, of course, that led to other connections for Danny. And, he was playing, I mean, he's played uh, with Charlie Parker, and I mean, I don't know how many musicians. Of course, he's with the big band, with was,
He recorded with Billie Holiday, for example. He was in Cab Calloway's
Cab Calloway.
orchestra.
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah,
Cab Calloway. He was on Cab's band.
for a long time. He
And,
was in the Lewis Russell Orchestra
right,
on record a
right.
bit, and
And a number of recording sessions. That's where he played with a number of other musicians.
right.
And plus, on these gigs that they were hiring, they were going out to Long Island and upstate New York, playing these gigs that he was hiring musicians for. Uh, for the band, you know.
Yeah, he said Jelly would call him, say, hometown. He said, he called me hometown. He said,
Right,
buy me 5 cockroaches. what,
right. That's
what do
what
you
he
call
called
it?
musicians,
Yes.
roaches.
I
Because New
love that,
Orleans is
man.
known for its cockroaches.
Yeah.
They're all
That's, that was,
running around everywhere.
Mr. Barker was such a great oral storyteller, but he was also a terrific writer. I mean, he really had
Yes,
a wonderful writing style, very
yes.
direct and but quite eloquent and elegant as well, and funny.
Right, right. Yes, he was raconteur, and he knew the stories, the tropes, and he understood them on deep philosophical levels. And he had that secret understanding of how you use comedy and how you use jokes, because he could make his point with them very well.
Oh yeah, he
Right.
could he could land a touche when someone didn't even know they had been hit.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
He was very gifted that way, but always gracious in his repartee, whatever the situation. Tough but gracious.
Exactly. And I think that was a great part of the Danny Barker personality that made him successful with working with the young musicians with the Fairview Baptist Church. Um, while he had this reputation that they knew about from New York and that sort of thing, the person of Danny Barker was someone that was very approachable. And he understood what he was about, he understood the culture, and that's what he was teaching those young musicians at the Fairview Baptist Church. The minister had asked Danny Barker at this church just out there on St. Bernard Avenue near the St. Bernard Project where Danny Barker was living and was attending the church. And of course, this minister, I can't think of his name just now, baptized Danny
Darby,
Barker.
Reverend Darby.
Darby, yes, Reverend Darby. And then Reverend and Danny Barker asked him, what did he want him to do? You know, and he told Danny uh, that he says, I want you to build me a band. I want to have a band for the Baptist church. Well, the idea was more of having something for the kids around St. Bernard Street that they could do. I mean, there was a playground, something like that, but something that the church could get them interested in and to pull them into the church. And that's how that band got started. But Danny Barker's personality and his great ability in connecting with young people is what made it truly work.
Yeah, and he had a set of alumni from that band that have had profound influence on the
Exactly, right,
music, not just in New Orleans, but writ large across the globe.
right. Mhm.
People who have gone on to really be stars of the music and make.
Exactly. Well, I think the key to that was that profound understanding that he had of culture. And that's what I was getting at, that he introduced them to, because many of the young musicians and young people generally, and particularly African Americans, young ones, they were not aware of the traditional music. It had become something that they were separate from. They had another music, so to speak. And so they began to understand about the role of music in society, which is a very important kind of thing in every society. Uh, and Danny Barker introduced them to that and the meaning of it. And so while they were taking technical studies for their instruments, trumpet or clarinet or whatever, in other places with the teachers at the school or privately, they were discovering something about the role of music in New Orleans culture.
And he understood deeply how valuable these things that he had grown up around are,
Right,
will be, and had a gift for communicating that.
right, exactly.
And that it was a receptive audience, I think. Maybe not initially, but ultimately, he certainly reached a panoply of young men mostly men, and
Right.
I'm sure he affected a lot of young women too with just his general outlook on life.
Right. Well, there was a need for someone to do that. And I'm speaking out of my own personal experience. I know when Ellis and I, we were growing up, we were teenagers and I had a band, but we had a different take on traditional music. You know, we didn't quite see it the same way. While we played some of the tunes,
Right.
we were not trying to play it. You know, there were some things that about the music and its relationship to culture that I discovered later in years. I didn't know as a teenager. And so there wasn't a Danny Barker in my time, is what I'm saying, you see.
Right. And people like Herlin Riley and Greg Stafford and Leroy Jones.
Right, right. That was a whole nother wave of musicians. The guys who came along with us, it was a different situation.
Right. They got the benefit of that, and he they all to a person still speak of him as Mr. Barker,
Yes, right.
and
With that respect.
they have such deep respect for him, and they talk about the values he instilled in them, extra musical values that he instilled
Exactly
in them,
right.
that have stood them in good stead, as so many of them have pursued professional lives
Right.
as musicians. And I would say Danny was an educator of the highest order.
Exactly. Right.
You know,
Yes, he was.
he
Yeah, he was a very cultured person, you know, I mean, and the more profound meaning of culture and not surface kinds of valuables that people uh, find necessary to collect, but and the more profound aspects of it. He knew what that was about.
I think when he was living in New York, he was reading about 7 newspapers a day. Man, he was a reader. I mean, he was an
Right.
autodidact. You know, he, he,
Yeah, and from what I understand, at least told me all these, you know, he was in New York living like a Seventh Ward Creole. You see, having
right,
all these dinners at his house and cooking gumbo and red beans and rice and ham and stuff, and people were showing up, and you know, and uh, his house became kind of a central place in Harlem where there was always somebody there coming, you know,
right.
and a great wealth of information being exchanged as a result.
And he was also Blue Lou may have said he was a piled up junk, but he was a collector. I mean, he kept a lot. He realized the value of things like flyers and you know mementos of the players that he kept a whole bunch of. Unfortunately, most of it I think was lost in Katrina, but
Mhm.
he had a sense of the importance of the history of the music and musicians.
Right. And it's just all of the things that go into this museum, making of a museum or collecting or maintaining things. And uh, uh, he had that about himself. And of course, and that's where he was working when I met him at the Jazz Museum. And when Jack Burkle went there and he says, I'm looking for Danny Barker. And he says, you're speaking to him.
So the um, when you after you met Mr. Barker, did you have a chance then to get to know him pretty well?
Oh, yes. We met on a number of occasions. I didn't play many gigs with him. I remember one specifically. There could have been some others. It's been a time now. But I remember playing a gig with Danny. He hired me to play at the Jung Hotel with him.
Yeah.
And he says, it's just a blues gig. We're just going to play blues, you know. Of course, it ended up we're playing other kinds of things as well. But I remember that one gig pretty well. And then I remember getting Danny involved in some productions that I was doing. One I did at Dillard University because I was adjunct professor there. And I had Danny and Mr. Cottrell and a number of the traditional musicians, uh, uh, Teddy Riley and uh, a bunch of those guys who played together. We did a presentation at Dillon University, and then I had over at Southern University, where I was an associate professor for many years and conductor of the choir. I had a program there that was celebrating Louis Armstrong,
Hmm.
and I had Danny Barker on that. He was on the panel with Alice Marsalis, and I had was a young trumpet player. Oh yeah, it was one of the people who were in the Fairview Church, Baptist Church. Uh, it was in his garage, I think, where they were rehearsing.
Yeah.
Um,
Leroy
and
Jones. Yeah.
Leroy Jones, right? I had Leroy Jones come over and play, and a number of local people. There was a conductor here to Kate something. Um, this is a conductor of the symphony. She was doing a program here, and she was on the program. Uh, so it was quite a nice program, and it was great for Danny because when you started him talking, people listened,
Yeah.
and he could
Right.
talk.
He was a talker, and a erudite and witty one, for sure.
Right.
Great storyteller, and someone who had a real gift for reading people. I mean, he could read people in a nanosecond. I think
Exactly right.
he had tremendous intuition about people and what they might want from him or need from him.
Yes. Yeah. As I remember now, Dr. Burkle, he was here in town, and I had both of them on this program. And then we went out to lunch later. I think we went to Dookie Chase and had lunch and spent the afternoon together. Right.
Yeah, very nice.
I think it was after their book came out. That's what that was about. And I had that at Southern.
Bourbon Street Black, the
Hmm.
collaboration between those two. Uh, well, uh, Danny's career reached from teaching, passing things on to these young people, all the way back to the pretty early days. I mean, he was in Lee Collins' band. I think that was the first great band he said
Uh-huh.
he was in. He started, like we were saying earlier, on ukulele and had a spasm band.
Right.
Not everyone knows what what was a spasm band, Roger.
Well, my understanding, I've never had anybody to really explain it to me, but uh, what I gathered, it was a string band where there was all string instruments, the instruments that you strung up to play, like ukuleles and guitars and banjos and double bass and that sort of thing. Uh,
Right.
uh, and that there was this kind of very great movement that went along with the playing. Now I could be wrong, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, he said it's the Buzan Kings, I think was the name. Anyway, they played for, they would hustle tips in bars, and they would play some at parties. If you're having a party and you couldn't afford a more professional band, that was
Mhm.
what he said. It was like uh, uh, 50 cents for each player, and he said, "Make mine $1. I'm a leader." So,
Yeah,
yeah, he was already thinking in terms of the
right,
profession.
right,
But
right.
he did actually begin pretty steadily playing at 15, and
Mhm.
at working, I guess, really the rest of his life.
Right. My other connection to Danny was with opening a way for him to teach, because I had been approached by Sister Madeline Marie at Xavier University, who was head of the department at that time and who was interested in developing a Black Studies course in music, history course or something like that. This was the middle of the 60s, and a lot of universities, institutions felt that there was a need to do something like it, to have studies about Black culture in the curriculum. And so she spoke to me about it, and I I had first I said, well, I was doing something else. I don't know if I had just gotten a commission, but I was working on a piece. And so I turned her in the direction of Ellis Marcellus, and he took it. And so he was there for a while, a couple of years. And then after Ellis left, she came back to me. And so, and I told her about Danny Barker then. And she was curious who he was, what he had done, other than being a jazz musician. They have to have some kind of way of certifying you,
Right,
you
right,
know.
right.
And so I told her that he just had this book out, Bourbon Street Black. And so then they became very interested.
Uh,
And
uh,
I talked to them about Dr. Jack Burkle. And of course, Danny ended up getting the position. And of course, as it turned out, it was one of the more popular courses that Xavier was offered in the music department. It was one of these kinds of courses that anyone, from other departments could sign up for.
right.
And Danny had with loads of students every year.
Oh man, I would have loved to have had that course. It would have been a wonderful thing. That's one you wouldn't cut. You wouldn't cut that class.
Oh yeah, because he had something to tell, and it was something that everybody knew was true, but it was funny, and I
Yeah,
mean, it was his way of using, uh, this whole business of how do you deliver stuff to
right.
people and make it more palatable. So you make it funny.
Bruce Rayburn had a great phrase he used in conjunction with Danny Barker, which I always loved, and that is that he didn't necessarily have to have been someplace to give you a first person account, but he could give you a great first person account.
Right.
He took he synthesized a lot of information and
Yes.
knew how to convey it in a
Right.
great way. And then he really did turn things around in terms of interest in brass band music. I mean, that Fairview Baptist Church band helped reignite what has continued to be a very vibrant scene now to this day.
Right, yes. And, it has made inroads into, uh, uh, through evolution of these young musicians themselves. Uh, all like Wynton Marsalis was in that group. Dr. Michael White, I don't know how many people, and they've gone off and they're on uh, trajectories from that center of the Fairview Baptist Church. I mean, in far distance and almost seemingly diametrically opposed, paths, but they're all connected together.
Right.
They're
Yeah. Yeah. The through thread being that uh, the culture that produced this music is a varied and very rich one, much wider in scope, maybe than a lot of people had understood.
exactly right. And then I think, and in ways which has yet to be told, someone will tell. We're just touching on the edges of it here now.
Yes.
But I remember someone saying, writing that roots divide and go deeper, and then divide and go deeper.
Deeper. Right. Right. Yes. The fractal effect,
Right.
as they that pattern keeps repeating, and that's one of the great things I think about the jazz community generally in New Orleans. And Danny was certainly a great exponent of this. Is there's a true commitment to passing on the things that we know about the music and to the generation coming up that expresses an interest.
Yeah, and that's one of the great features of New Orleans, this business of passing on. New Orleans is one of those places where you can learn. Now, many cities, people, they don't tell you anything. I mean, you don't learn there. You go there after you learn.
Right.
I understand that's what New York is like. Most of the people who are there who can play it, they started out somewhere else. You
Right.
know,
Right.
there
Right.
may be a few there now who grew up, who learned in New York, but for the most part, it's people who moved there from somewhere else, you know.
Right, right. And
And but New Orleans is a place I know from my own experience growing up, and after I became, you know, performing musician, we always let the youngsters come and play, let them play, even if they couldn't keep a tempo, let them get on the stand, you see, and pass something on to them, show them something,
right.
uh, rather than keep them at a distance. And
Well, that was always one of the things I admired so much about Ellis at the Snug Harbor gig. He would I think there might have been a little bit of qualifying of the people who sat in, but for the most part, if someone presented themselves as capable of doing it, he gave them a shot.
exactly right, right, right. Well, he grew up in that, and that's how it was. You know, uh, not out there much anymore, but I suspect it's still going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope we're all back somewhere together at some point here, Roger, in the not too distant future, because some of us don't have that much of the clock left to run out here. But
Yeah.
we'll hope that 2021 brings us back into a live music opportunity. Uh, and certainly, meantime, it's great to have a chance to share some of the things about uh, some of the people who have inspired our and subsequent generations, and a chance like this Barker Festival on Zoom. So many people now through the pandemic, I think, have gotten used to uh, this kind of a platform. But I think that means there's a pretty good audience out there. So we'll hope that people will take advantage of the opportunity to find out more about Mr. Barker.
Yeah, and I always consider it a pleasure and an honor and an opportunity to be on something on a forum like this where we're talking about Danny Barker and particularly, and to be on with you because you're a person I admire your skill and ability to conduct interviews and I'm hoping that, you know, in another year or so we'll be face to face carrying on
Yes.
the Danny Barker Festival and all the different panels and forums and things that we've had in the past.
Well, a number of people are beginning, I think, outside of the city to be aware of Mr. Barker's legacy through the efforts of the festival, and which uh, has been a real grassroots effort, mostly uh, driven by Mr. Detroit Brooks, but a lot of other people involved. And it's an opportunity to talk about someone who took a long view on life, but also had a very present. He was always present in the moment. I think he had
Right,
an abiding philosophy that stood him pretty well,
right.
and as 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 do so many New Orleans musicians who have I've had the great fortune to get to know a little bit, and man, it's great to see you once again on the festival and just to see you, Roger.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say, you know, a shout out again to Detroit Brooks,
Yeah.
who is a wonderful person and musician, and who is because of his own person really makes the Danny Barker Festival work. I mean, Detroit is just he's a great spiritual man. I don't know
Yes.
if you know that.
Oh,
But he has the
witness to
ability
that.
to pull people together and to get them to work and do things. And this festival is a manifestation of his abilities, Detroit Brooks.
Yeah, I think the spirit of Mr. Barker definitely shines through Mr. Brooks.
Right, right.
Well, thank you very much for being a part of it again, and we look forward to our next opportunity to talk about Mr. Barker and all the legacy that he has left us so well endowed with.
Fred, thank you very much. Look
Yeah.
forward to seeing you when we don't have to wear a mask in person.
Yeah, I said this year was the first time I was not only allowed but actually required to wear a mask in a bank. So
Okay.
I'll be hoping that that situation doesn't attain much longer.
All right. Take care, stay
Okay.
safe, and
Thanks,
be well.
Ron. Adios.
Bye-bye.